Sometimes we just want to make some progress on our TBR, and that's where novellas fit in perfectly. This video is going to cover 11 novellas that I didn't know I needed, but turns out I did. I really recommend all 11 of these novellas, and I hope you find at least one that you're interested in picking up. Let's start off with a quick little reminder that a couple of years ago, I did a video on sci-fi novellas. I will link that for you in the cards and in the description box down below in case you haven't seen that video, but I'm not going to be repeating any of those novellas in this video. So let's get into some lesser known novellas. First one I'm going to start off with is Freeze Frame Revolution by Peter Watts. This is one that I've recommended before on my channel and is a really fun sci-fi space mystery. This one follows a girl named Sunday who is specifically made for the job and the crew that she has. She is in a spaceship that's inside an asteroid that is going around the universe, creating a web of wormhole gates to allow for better interstellar travel. She and her crew have only been awake for a couple of days each 1,000 years to actually complete the gate. The rest of the time they're in cryosleep. Now, as the centuries begin to tick by, they really start to question whether or not the species that they even started making the gates for is still around or not. Problem being, it's really hard to start a ship-wide mutiny when you're only awake a couple of days every 1,000 years or so. This story was really a fun, fantastic story, lots of layers, and what I liked most about this novella is that there are little tiny Easter eggs that the author has planted within the text. Now, this is not something that you're going to be able to get from an audiobook. I don't even know if there's an audiobook available, but I would highly recommend this particular novella because Peter Watts is just something special. The next novella on this list is going to be The Practice, the Horizon, and the Chain by Sofia Samatar. This is a recent release, I think in 2024, and should have won the Hugo for Best Novella this year. I'm sorry, Ray Naylor, but this one was better. This book is essentially a sci-fi allegory of Plato's Allegory of the Cave. This one takes place and follows a slave boy in the bowels of a ship who's running the engines. And he is essentially uneducated and he is taught the practice, which gives meaning to his life. He masters the practice and by both wit and luck ends up being promoted to a university on the mainstay of the ship. Here he is forced to learn the horizon, which he adds to his practice. From there, he takes more and more steps in life mastery and eventually learns of the chain that links the rest of the practice, the horizon, and the rest of the pieces of the novella together. This one was incredibly clever and took Plato's Allegory of the Cave one step further. If you like philosophy at all, you gotta pick up this one. It really blew me out of the water and was my very first 5-star novella of the year. So I definitely recommend doing yourself a favor and picking this one up. The next novella is The Seep by Chana Porter. This one is a little bit of an older one and is definitely philosophy light. For those of you out there who have yet to contemplate how problematic it might be to pick the easy out solution all the time. In this novella, we follow some characters on an Earth that we don't recognize, where an alien race has descended down and created first contact. They have offered humanity a cure for all our ills, all our anxieties, all of our problems. All you have to do as an individual is choose to mind link with the alien race. However, nobody has ever unlinked from this mind. Is it because it's addictive? Is it because it's a prison? Or is it just that great? This story really didn't necessarily blow my mind, but I think that it did what it did really well. It's kind of a cozy apocalypse type first contact story, and it's very slow and plodding and reaches its crescendo almost with a whisper. The next novella on this list is going to be Flatland, a romance of dimensions by Edwin Abbott. This novella was written in 1884. That's right, it's pretty old. This one was really one that blew me out of the water. It is not a romance. This story follows a character named A Square. That's right, a square. And we watch as he does several chapters of writing about what it's like to inhabit his world, which happens to be named Flatland and is a world of 2 dimensions only. Through this understanding and through his eyes, we understand how people work within only 2 dimensions. And there's quite a lot of math and geometry in this story, but it's all very cleverly done because it doesn't quite feel like a textbook. There's even a chapter about women and their problematic nature to men in this story that I found to be absolutely hilarious. So something to look forward to. In the second half of the novel, we follow Ace Square as he finally takes us into 2 other worlds within Flatland. This story kind of felt a little bit like Gulliver's Travels, but really incorporated the science and the mathematics into the story, and it was a very cleverly done, eye-opening novella for me. Because if 2D is so much different than 3D, you can almost extrapolate this into what would 4D be like. Next novella on the list is going to be The Man Who Folded Himself by David Gerald. This is probably the most realistic and also most concerning book that I have ever read about time travel. We follow Daniel Eakins as he is bequeathed with a time travel belt from his dead uncle. And he gets time to play around, learn how to use the belt, and figure out what to do with something like this. This one was very easy to follow, very inspiring, and what is really intriguing about this book is essentially what Daniel discovers is not just about time, but it's also about himself and his own identity and who he is. Even going as far as exploring having an affair with himself. That's right. It's very disturbing and yet really, really thought-provoking. This novella was incredibly well done, and if you want to be folded in half multiple times by the author, this is the novella for you. The next novella on our list is a sci-fi masterwork called RUR, also known as Rossum's Universal Robots, by Karel Čapek. This is a Czech author and was written in the 1920s. It is written as a play, so you need to know that going in. In this play, we follow Helena, who is the boss's daughter, and she is asking the workers of the factory where they make artificial humans. There's a lot of discussion in this play about what makes a human and what makes it other, and also it is the first novel. It is the one that coined the term robot, which I guess means surf in Czech, but is a really incredible foundational classic sci-fi work that was a joy to read. It is one that really blew my mind and is one that if you haven't heard of or haven't checked it out yourself, it's a high recommend. The next novella in this list is Pheresis by Greg Egan. That's right, folks, Greg Egan wrote a novella, and I think this is probably his most accessible work. In this novella, we're following Freya, who is introducing us to an alien culture who lives on an ice planet, and they are running out of fertile soil and fresh air, and because of this, they're very dependent on geysers from the warmer interior of the planet to explode up and put out some soil and hopefully some fresh air that will allow them to live in future generations. However, Freya has a very unique idea. She begins to dream of a tower that goes high enough with ice to allow them to jump to the other twin planet's atmosphere. And the twin planet seems to be a lot more green, seems to have a lot more freshness, and seems to be the hope for Freya's people. The problem is she has to talk them into this. After this first section of the novella, we follow two more sections as future generations go forward. This story was incredibly accessible. It was very easy to follow, but you do have to know it's Greg Egan. So of course, the science comes before the plot, but that's not always bad, especially in this case. I was really pleased by this novella. Definite recommend. The next novella that is a little bit more fun is going to be The Futurological Congress by Stanislaw Lem. That's right, we're talking about the guy who wrote the book Solaris. Fortunately or unfortunately, I found this book to be a lot better than Solaris. This story is very satirical in nature and is quite absurdist. You need to know that going in. This book follows our main character who is asked to go to a conference, the 8th Futurological Congress, and it's happening in the future in Costa Rica. Of course, inside a Hilton hotel. As he goes and checks in, we get to find out all the other conferences that are happening at this time in the hotel, and eventually have some very absurdist scenes, which get explained very quickly as our very astute main character realizes that the water has been poisoned with some kind of hallucinogen. And as a result, reality starts to blur with fantasy pretty intensely, and we get a lot of our absurdist situations that happen. This book is rife with social and political commentary, and despite the fact that I don't love typical absurdism, this one really got my goat. I really had a great time with this one, and I would highly, highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun, there's some laugh out loud moments, and it does make a lot of really useful and prescient comments about society and politics. The next novella on the list is one that I have to thank John from Sci-Fi Scavenger for ordering and allowing my dogs to chew on, subsequently leaving this novella in my care. This is called The Empress of Mars by Cage Baker. This novella is a space western that takes place on Mars. And we're following Mary Griffith, who is an employee and a hopeful scientist who is going to Mars with the company to help colonize Mars. However, since Mars doesn't prove as lucrative as the company was hoping for, it subsequently fires all of its employees that it thinks it doesn't need anymore, leaving Mary out of a job, and also without enough money for a ride home. She does the only thing that she can think of, and that is opening the first ever and only bar on Mars called the Empress of Mars. This story was really fun because we follow Mary through all of her trials and tribulations of attempted survival in this very wild, wild west town of Mars. There's a lot of unlucky things that happen to poor Mary, as well as some company selfishness, and yet she is trying to struggle and survive each and every one. This one was nothing but pure fun, and I would highly, highly recommend it. I have not read anything by Cage Baker before, so needless to say, I'm going to be picking up more books by her. The next novella is called Sisters of the Vast Black by Lena Rather. This one is nuns in space, which does sound incredibly cheesy, but trust me, it goes a lot further than you think. This story follows Sister Gemma, who is the Order of Saint Rita. She and her fellow sisters are on an interstellar trip of mercy when they get interrupted by a distress call from a newly founded colony. When they follow the distress call, they end up finding their lives in danger and some information that puts both their loyalties and their faith into question. There is a lot of really interesting subplots in this story that I just didn't expect. Each character feels very realized, and it really isn't a story about religion. So for those of you who are really worried about that, this is still safe. I would highly recommend it because I was very impressed by the number of subplots that this author was able to put into this first novella. There is a second follow-up called The Sisters of the Forsaken Star, but I don't think it was as good. And this first novella is more than good enough as a standalone. So definitely something to check out. And last, but certainly not least, is a novella that was published this year called Automatic Noodle by Anna Lee Newitz. This is a story for those of you out there who just need some fun escapism, or if you particularly like cozy legends and lattes kind of a story, this one is definitely just a all-around great palate cleansing read that you don't have to apply your brain to. And it turns out this novella got me out of a little bit of a reading slump, so I have to include it on here. This novella follows a hodgepodge of derelict robots in the future who have to overcome poverty as well as anti-robotic prejudice and even review bombers to try to open up a noodle shop and have it be somewhat successful. That plot is about all there is, but it's really a lot about the characters, it's a lot about striving against other people's poor reviews and continuing to follow your dream. It was an easy palate cleansing read that was incredibly entertaining and turned out to be just what I needed. So, of these novellas, which ones are you gonna check out? I would recommend them all. But I highly recommend that if you have any other novella recommendations, please leave them in the comments section down below for our fellow viewers. And until next time, you guys, I will see you in the next video.